So today I want to talk about the name of God in the Jewish mystic traditions. If you have been following along with this series, you will probably have seen my Merkava video, which is one of their few mystic traditions. You will also probably have seen my Law of Correspondence video, which is where I briefly touched on the Nikola Tesla theory, 369, and I want to go back onto that theory today of how creation happens. And I also really want to dive back into the name Yahweh, which we talked about in last week's video on the Torah, which is where I very much did break down the beginning of the historical level briefly, found in these pretty little texts. Because they did. The ancient writers, they wrote in symbolism, and they used people, places, and things, gods as archetypes to represent the cosmic principles. Yes, astrotheology is very much encoded into these texts. So to the 50 plus of you that have emailed and DM'd me, I am working on that video. No, I will not be responding to each of you individually. I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience. And so I want to really go back on this, and I want to talk about the Trinity again, which I will link that video up there because I did start to break down in that video of how the Trinity represented cosmic principles. And we are going to see that in the Sefer Yetzirah today, which is their book of creation, on their aspect of the Trinity, and how they saw creation happening and how creation happens, and therefore what they encoded into their storytellings to teach you if you want to go seek and find how to create a life you want to live. Because in ancient writings across the board, and this is not unique just to like the Jewish tradition, this is with the Tao and with the Toltec and with the Egyptians and the Greeks, you see it with the Gnostic texts, they have an exoteric layer and they have an esoteric layer. Exo means outer. It is what the masses understand. It is what the masses get. And they do their little rituals and their prayers. They go to their temple and they do all that shit and they think that they're going to be saved. And that's the truth, okay? They are just set with their simple minds. But then the inner circles, okay? The eso, meaning inner, they actually understood that these stories and these symbols were meant to teach them something about the universe and about themselves. And that's why I personally believe the Bible is a map, a myth, and a mirror. And that is also because I truly believe the ancient writers knew something that modern literalism has forgotten, and that symbols are the language of the soul, symbols are living, and they communicate truths that sometimes plain language cannot. Okay, because truth must be experienced internally before it can be understood at times intellectually. Yet in our society, especially due to bad religion, we are super logical. If it doesn't make logical sense, if it doesn't make intellectual sense, it's hogwash, it's not real. And we have forgotten the mystery. We have forgotten that we are very much spiritual beings and that sometimes things just don't make intellectual sense. That's why you're not supposed to be led by the intellect, but by the spirit. Okay, you're supposed to be led by the right side of your mind. That's why you're supposed to be of the tribe of Judah. And so there very much is layers to these, and there very much is the cosmic principles, the laws of nature which govern us. And if you know how to use them properly, you then can apply them to yourself. And that's why you must go inward. Carl Jung talks about that in his books of psychology. And then you can actually start to create a life that you want to live. Okay, so they did. They encoded the cosmic principles in the name Yahweh. Now, no, I do not personally believe that is the name of God. Again, storytelling. People are getting caught up on the symbols and they are worshiping the symbols rather than understanding what they actually stood for. People are arguing, no, it's Yahuwah, no, it's Yahweh, no, it's Jehovah. And everybody's getting upset and it's like, yeah, that's the one true God. And it's like, no. Okay, the God Yahweh was a southern war tribe God and was a very jealous, narcissistic God. That is like the worst God, in my opinion, to fucking worship out of all of these things, besides Molech and some of the other ones. Again, people took these archetypes, they took these symbols, they forgot what they meant, and they said, we're going to make idols out of these and we're going to worship them. And that would be your masses. So I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about the Trinity, and I really do just want to dive into it because in our culture, you are going to notice a different spelling of a later tradition. Now, if you read the Sefer Yetzirah, you are going to notice an IHV spelling. That is very much the Latin in the Old English, but in the Hebrew, it would be YHW. And then some people, especially in Christianity, be like, there's supposed to be another H on that. And that is because in their later traditions, they added on the fourth letter because these stood for three different principles. It stood for air, it stood for water, and it stood for fire. And then when you understand their principles in the Sefer Yetzirah and the law of gender, you understand that that's how the masculine and the feminine creates, and then they're just in different orders on how that creation happens. But then with the Kabbalah and the later traditions, they added on the other H because they believed that we needed the element earth into that and that it was not complete and fully embodied because 4 is also structure. But across neighboring Israelite and surrounding mystical traditions, you do find multiple symbolic spellings of this name. But for today, I really want to just stay focused on this spelling, and then I'm going to add on the H later. And I really just want to focus on these variations on how the creation happens in these esoteric texts. Again, the book of creation in Kabbalah, and then with the Hebrew 22 letters, because that's how they create. Because they believed with the Hebrew alphabet as well as the Greek that the entire secrets of the universe were contained into those alphabets. And modern day Hebrew is very different from Phoenician Canaanite, which is where Hebrew actually came from when you study old languages. But for this, we are using their 22 letters of their Hebrew alphabet. So now I want to talk about the 10 numbers found in the Sefer Yetzirah. And this is how they believe that creation unfolded. When you read the story, if you check out the PDF, you are going to see that God created in a certain way. And he went from spirit, air, to the water, to the fire, to then the height, depth, east, west, south, and north. Okay? And that is because the text is basically saying reality unfolds from spiritual principles into elemental principles into dimensions of existence itself. And if you know anything about metaphysics, okay, I'm just going to show you real quick. This is consciousness. Okay, that's God. That's what people are calling God. And then you get your masculine and feminine principles. Okay, that's your law of gender. That's polarity. That's free will and choice. That is what you have. That's how you get to create. And then from that, you get the pre-atoms, and then the atoms, and then the elements, and then the plants, and then the animals, and then the humans. And consciousness just keeps expanding. Okay, that's the metaphysics aspect. And so then when you do lay these out, they do kind of create like a cube of direction, and then they do create that firmament aspect of above the firmament, below the firmament, and then the four corners of the earth and the four corners of your mind. Now, whether you personally believe we live on a flat earth or a globe, I don't personally care. I believe we have bigger fish to fry than understanding if we're flat or if we're round. The only thing I do care about that, and I will be completely frank, is if it's an ice wall and if there is the 4 different gates to get to the outer rings, and that means the giant penguins are real, and I would choose to fight the giant penguins. So from pure consciousness, you get voice, spirit, word, which is the Holy Spirit. Okay? Creation, Trinity, 3, 6, 9. And this is how creation begins. Creation begins through vibration, breath, speech, and consciousness. He spoke. He sung over the waters. And then with the second, we do have air. And from the spirit, he produced air. Air represents your breath, your vibration, your sound, the median of the 22 Hebrew letters, which we're going to talk about later. And this is why the Hebrew letters, when you read the Sefer Yetzirah, emerge here. Because based on how you pronounce things, on how with the 7 double letters, okay, polarity, that's how you create the duality, then different creation happens. And then with the third, you have water. And from the air, he formed water. Water symbolizes the potential matter, the fluidity, the cosmic womb. Again, you have the womb of creation. Creation comes from the feminine, and then it goes forth, the action, the masculine principle. And then from that, structure begins emerging from the chaos, okay, the chaotic womb. In the Egyptian myths, they talk about chaos, and then order happened. And then you have your fire. Okay, and from the water, he formed fire. Fire represents the energy, the animation, the divine activity, and the transformation. And then you see in the stories comes the throne and the angels and the celestial structures. So now the cosmos are alive and they are very much ordered. And then the last 6 appear in these 10 numbers. And with it, you have above the firmament, below the firmament, forward, backwards, right, and left. But why only 6 directions? Because in ancient cosmology, 6 directions create dimensional space itself. Think of a cube. That's actually, again, they have their little black cube, okay, their structure, their order. They have it. You see it in different traditions across the board when you study symbolism. And this creates an entire complete field. Because again, God and consciousness, from that comes all things. Because the Sefer Yetzirah was not merely saying God made stuff. You know, when you read the 6 days of creation, or 7 if you count a day of rest as a day of creation itself, but I truly believe 6 because 3, 6, 9 is creation. Creation, Trinity, okay, you have 3 in everything. You have mind, body, spirit, and then later traditions added on the 4th element, so then the astral field as well. You have the 6 of embodying. Okay, that's when things start to take form and go into the directions. And then 9 is consciousness, the number of the universe. And this was very much their blueprint, which then they also used their 22 Hebrew letters. And then with later Kabbalah traditions, you see the cube of space, the tree of life, sacred letters, astrology, and creation through sound and frequency, because this is how they created. And when you do read the Sefer Yetzirah, which we'll talk about later, I want to talk though about the Hebrew letters first, you will notice that there's also gates. Gates of creation 231 of them, which adds up to the number 6, embodied creation itself. But I want to stay on topic momentarily and talk about the Hebrew letters, which very much is how you create through the sound. And there is 3 aspects to this. You have, again, 3 aspects, Trinity, that's how you create. You have the 3 mother letters, the 3 mothers, plural. And the 3 mother letters are Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Aleph represents air, okay, because it does. It represents, again, spirit, air, water, fire. Air is very much your breath and your balance, the spirit inside of you. And this is where also they believe that life happened. Okay, not to get into a little side rant, people that like to use this Bible to say, oh, God's pro-life. No, the God in this Bible is very much anti-life, okay? Yahweh very much promoted genocide. And the ancients believed, especially the ancient Israelites, they believed that life happened at first breath. They viewed the fetus as property, not an unborn child with its own rights. They very much believed in it being property until it took its first life of breath, and that is because air. Okay, the breath of life, Yahweh, must come into you for you to be alive. Mem represents water, which is very much your chaos, your subconscious, the womb. And Shin represents fire, which is your transformation, your divine energy, and your creative force. And again, take note of the Trinity. You have air, water, fire forming again because it goes spirit, air, water, fire. I know I kind of erased that, but just remember in memory. And that is also where the cosmic principles start coming in on masculine versus feminine, but that's a different topic for a different time. Because in the Sefer Yetzirah tradition, it is very much always Trinity creates. That's how creation happens. And so as we saw earlier, the Holy Spirit had the voice, the Spirit, and the Word. And the text even states itself that God engraved his name with numbers, letters, and sound. And that is why you have the 22 Hebrew letters. Again, 4 equals structure. You have the 10 numbers, which we talked about, the 6 directions and then the 4 aspects of elements. And then from that, you get 231 gates, which then is how you create. And based on if you rotate it with ordered consciousness or chaotic consciousness, good or evil, then you create with these principles. Next, I want to talk about the 7 double letters on creation, because that is the next aspect of the Hebrew 22 letters. So these are your 7 double letters, which is the next aspect of the 22 Hebrew letters. And yes, they do represent planets and they do have their polarity, because based on how you use principles and based on how you pronounce things, life and death is in the power of the tongue. Because the idea here is that sound itself changes reality. Because the Sefer says that water is silent, fire is sibilant, and the air derived from spirit is as the tongue of a balance standing between the contraries. The text then says, he hath formed, weighed, and composed with these 22 letters every created thing. The entire secrets of the universe is contained in the 22 Hebrew letters, and this is where the language itself becomes sacred, because the letters then are not merely symbols, they are viewed as energetic principles. They are vibrational building blocks of reality itself. And then even Egyptian traditions talk of their Trinity with Amun-Ra and Ptah, which then turned into Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac when the Hebrews and the Jews told their own telling in this pretty little book of ours. So we have different principles going on here, and then we have our 12 simple letters. And I'm going to have to erase this, so if you want it, screenshot it. And the 12 simple letters are not random sounds. They are very much cosmic channels in their Sefer Yetzirah tradition. And each one is linked to a zodiac sign, a month, a faculty of the soul, and a part of the human body. Because as above, so below, as within, so without. You have 12 cranial nerves, you have 12 Greek gods, you have 12 tribes of Israel, you have 12 disciples, you have 12 zodiac, you have 12 months, you have 12 simple letters. Numbers repeat across the board because every single culture taught their own mystic tradition about the principles of the universe in their own language that they understood. And this shows together that the mystical idea that language, body, time, and heaven are all woven together. And so the alphabet actually becomes a map of creation itself. And the deeper point here also with the zodiac, I do want to point, it is not just horoscope astrology. I know sometimes, especially because of New Age religion and so forth, you get those girls that are like, I'm not going to date you, you're a Cancer, we can't be friends, you're a Virgo, and they're basically the equivalent of a middle-aged racist white man. But there is very much structure to the zodiac and to the stars, and in Jewish mysticism, it is very much a symbolic structure showing how the divine intelligence patterns itself throughout time, body, consciousness, and creation, because also this does create the gates, which is what I want to talk about, is your 230 gates. And if you notice the reappearing layers, something that I love about mysticism is the numbers always show up, 3, 6, 9. Okay, again, Nikola Tesla, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but as you see, you have 3 mother letters, but then you also have 3 sections to their 22 Hebrew letters that are then broken up. So then the Sefer Yetzirah introduces your 231 gates, and it says these 22 letters, which are the foundation of all things, he arranged as upon a sphere with 231 gates. And the next part is where the symbolic mathematics becomes super interesting, and that's also what I really love, when you understand the principles of our world and you understand the esoteric teachings and you understand how the universe very much is structured, and it has its mathematics and it has its sacred symbols and its sacred structures, and you even see that with like the Greek Fibonacci and its rectangle and so forth. Either way, with this, the 6 repeatedly becomes 231 is introduced into 6. And 6 repeatedly becomes the number of manifested creation. Again, embodiment. 3 is the Trinity. When you double that, you get embodiment. And that is where creation comes with the 6 directions, the 6 days of creation, the 6 as above, so below, north, east, south, west, and the structure of embodied reality itself. And so another thing I actually want to show you real quick, I am going to erase that, is when you see angel numbers across the board, they repeat as well. So you got 3, you got 6, you got 9, you got 12, you got 15, you got 18, which equals 3, 6, 9, you got 21, 24, and then 27, which equals 3, 6, 9. Okay? It always repeats. So that is how much we are very much mathematical when you're seeing signs or numbers. You know, some people are really big into that of like, oh, I saw 444. They have different meanings in the spiritual realm and in the spiritual communities on what they mean, you know, those angel numbers, but they always reduce themselves down to 3, 6, 9, because again, 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 9. 3 times 3 equals 9. 6 plus 3 equals 9. So it's always going to that number. And so now I want to talk about the 231 gates, because at its core, it's frequency. This is very much coming out in the age of Aquarius, which is what we're in now with the age of AI and consciousness. And that's why people are starting to wake up and actually be more receptive to actually learning about this, because the veil is starting to thin. The playing board basically is starting to change, and that's why we are seeing things happen. We have moved on from the last age into the new age, and that is where also the new age teachings are coming on board. Now, yes, that is its own religion in its own way, but we are just in a new age with new language and terminology. But at its center, fire. Think of fire. Fire is neutral. For good, it can warm a house, but for evil, it can burn down a house, okay? Good and evil, ordered consciousness, chaotic consciousness, life, death, wealth, poverty, wisdom, folly, skepticism, naivety, masculine, feminine, so forth. There's principles that govern, and they need to be in harmony, okay? The masculine and feminine need to be balanced. You need to balance your chariot. That's where Merkava comes on scene, and that's where it is used alongside the Sefer Yetzirah in your creation process. Because the Sefer says that the sphere can rotate for good or evil. The same principles that govern our reality, that govern the cosmos, and that govern you down to the most tiniest of details can either create harmony, order, or they can create destruction, chaos. As the Bible says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Those that love it will eat its fruit. Those that have respect for it. Okay? Because you are made imago Dei. In creation's likeness, you are a creator. Animals aren't creators. They're not as conscious as you. You have been given the beautiful divine spark of God, of Christ in you, your hope of glory, and the gospel is very much a power. And if you know how to use this power, you then can use it for good, just like there are groups that use it for evil. They understand these principles, okay? There's a secret society in our world that is known as this. I'm going to write it up on the board, okay? And at its core, they are creating such chaos in the world that people are begging for what? Peace. They create chaos so that way they can order and govern. They use these principles for evil. Okay? So we need to realize that there is a lot more going on scene, and that if you know how to use these principles, as I talked about in my law of correspondence video, you can use them to create a life that you want to live, or you can use them to make other people create the life that you want to live for you, and they will be your servants. They will be the slaves because they're not the master of their house. So now I want to go back to the name of God, Yahweh, and I want to show you where they started to add on the fourth letter in their esoteric teachings, because as you see, numbers, letters, sound, the Holy Spirit is voice, spirit, word. The three mother letters, also known as the mothers, plural, is air, water, fire. 3, Trinity. Get this into your subconscious. Let it truly click. Let it just saturate your soul and truly understand 3 is how you create. 6 is embodiment of that creation. 9 is the number of life itself, of consciousness. 3, 6, 9. If you can understand and learn the principle 3, 6, 9, I'm telling you, all these laws and corresponding principles of the nature of our universe will become a lot easier for you to truly start to get. There is always a trinity in the creation process. Now, yes, you will have masculine and feminine, father and mother, but they will birth what? A child. Okay, that's why you have father mind, mother spirit, the nervous system of emotion. When they are in harmony together, a new identity, Christ is born, child comes on board. Okay, so I want to talk about the worlds, because Yahweh in the Kabbalist tradition, they ended adding on the fourth letter, and they represented 4 worlds. And then if you watched my video on like sin in the esoteric understanding, they had 4 aspects, because 4 starts to create structure. And so Atziluth is your highest realm. It is your world of emanation. It is Yod. It is the Y in Yahweh. And this is pure unity. Okay, this is pure consciousness. This is the archetypal source before separation exists. Again, metaphysics. Source. Okay, this is the world of emanation. This is where creation happens. From source, from consciousness comes all things of life. And when you study these different worlds, you're going to see fire, but it's not literal fire, okay? It is a spiritual fire. It is the illumination, the will, and the creative impulse. And this concept, when you study like comparative theology, it does show up across the board in different spiritual traditions. You see it with the monad, you see it with the Tao, the Brahman, the Ein Sof. It is the central point, because every culture taught their esoteric teachings in their own language. Now, you might be unfamiliar with the language, you might be unfamiliar with the symbols, you might even feel uncomfortable ever reading one of the different spiritual texts based on how you were raised and how you grew up, in the mind blocks you might have in your mind from high control systems of religion. I know Christians are very quick to demonize other spiritual texts, like let's say the Gita. I've been told in the past, oh, don't be reading that, you're entertaining demons. And it's like, the Gita actually is older than some of your texts. I think a lot of times, because of indoctrination with theology, people have this idea that the cult of Christianity is the one true religion because of history. When you understand empire and you understand how they colonized and whitewashed everything. They whitewashed Jesus. That's why he has a Greek name and he's a white man, even though he was a Jewish Aramaic speaking man and he was a nomad from a nomadic tribe. And so there is very much a lot of distortion to these texts due to bad theology and doctrines from early church fathers, and just due to political and empire control. But they did not emerge independently. They are not the one true one, and they are not the only one, okay? So it is going to help to understand that we have a lot more in common with our neighbors than we don't, and that's why we should love our enemies and love our neighbors as ourselves. And so the second world is Braya, which is your world of creation. That element is water. Sorry, I didn't write fire up there. You guys were probably confused. What does she mean by fire? And that's what it is, because each letter represents a different element. Okay, so the first element was fire with your Yod, and then your He, which is water. Okay, because this is where the world of differentiation begins. This is the first otherness, because this is the realm of archetypes and cosmic blueprints, as well as the light begins to actually reflect through like the prism, and the water represents the depth in the womb of creation. The cosmic womb, this is your second world in the creation process for them with the 4 worlds of Yahweh. Your third world is your Yetzirah, which is the element of air, and that is your world of mind, imagination, the elements. This is the realm of imagination. It is your world of formation in the mind, and many mystical systems did believe that consciousness patterns reality internally before the physical manifestation. That is why as within, so without is one of the laws of correspondence and one of the principles that govern our world. And that is also why visualization, symbolism, sacred language, meditation, and ritual are so important within esoteric traditions. Okay, if you can see it, you can achieve it. And if you can feel it, you lock in the identity. And that is also where if you are like thinking positive thoughts and affirmations and writing belief systems in, but the nervous system still is locked into a different belief and there's that disconnection between the two, it will not create a child. The husband and wife need to be in harmony with each other for a child to be born, because the Va is the connector between the worlds. It's kind of the hook between the worlds. It is the piece before that child, before the physical reality, the inner to the outer, which does take me to our fourth world. And this is Asya, which is earth, the world of action / manifestation. It is your material world. Okay, and that is where they believed in later traditions, you needed to have the fourth element in there because you had it in the invisible, in the spiritual, in the mind, in the invisible realm. But then this is where it actually goes into the physical reality, because as within, so without. If you want to change your outer reality, you need to first change your inner. But too many people, they try to change their outer reality without fixing the insides first, without getting to the root of the cause. And with this world, this is very much the world of action, of matter, of embodiment, of physical existence. And this world is where duality feels the most intense, because you have the self and the other, life and death, subject and object. But even though it does feel the most intense here, Kabbalah teachers and the Kabbalist tradition do teach that the world of action and manifestation is not separate from the world of emanation. They are all connected. So the physical realm does in fact become the manifestation of the realities preceding it. And this is also where the 10 numbers come back on board that we talked about at the beginning, because this is where the tree of life starts showing up in the Kabbalah traditions. And I do want to talk about that. And if you've read the Bible at any point in your life, or you've heard the stories, you probably are familiar with the story of Adam and Eve. And so now I want to circle back to the 10 numbers and the 10 aspects of the tree of life, because they do take from the Sefer Yetzirah and they bring it back on scene with the Kabbalah. And these are not physical objects or gods themselves, but they are symbolic principles and emanations through which divine consciousness unfolds into reality. From source, it trickles all the way down into the material realm. And you also see this symbol, the tree of life, showing back up in the Pretty Little Bible. Okay, with Adam and Eve, if you're familiar with that story. Sadly, though, due to theology, people have very much a distorted view of that story. And they believe that like the original sin started in the garden. They believe that Eve ruined mankind and everything else. But before the 4th century, with Augustine of Hippo, when he created his theology, it was very much seen with a different light and a different perspective. And they viewed Eve as the hero of that story, because they saw her as giving humanity free will and choice. And therefore, without free will, without polarity, you don't have creation. So when she actually ate from her dualistic mind, that's also when she realized she was separate from her creator. And that is where, that the ego starts to take place, the self. You realize that you're separate from other people. You're separate from your mother. If you study human development, I actually have a friend. Hi, Joni, if you're watching. She has been studying human development for over a decade. But what she does is she takes it and she places it over different parts of history and over different spiritual texts. And she notices the same patterns reoccurring, and girls naturally mature faster than boys, which is why Eve ate from the apple and the boy followed along. And if you know anything about older sisters with little brothers, they're usually commanding the little brothers, put on this dress, we're playing dress up in tea now. So I want to talk about the different aspects to this tree of life. And the first one is Keter, which is your crown. And this is where the source of consciousness happens. And this is where God is also just neutral. And that is why you have your 3 pillars. You have your masculine, your feminine, and your neutral pillar. You see it again showing up with the tarot cards and with Freemasonry symbol. And this is pure divine will. Go and receive your crown of righteousness. Go on to perfection. You see the crown symbolism showing up in the New Testament, and you see the symbols of go and receive a crown, okay? In heaven, when you get up to these higher places of consciousness, you get your crown, you get that wisdom and understanding, because those are actually the next aspects we're going to talk about in a moment. But it's pure divine will. It's the infinite potential before form. It is the source beyond comprehension, and it is the unity before its separation. Your next principle is Chakma, which is your wisdom, and this is the first flash of insight. This is your raw creative force. This is very much your divine masculine principle, and this is the spark of creation erupting outward. And when you understand the law of gender, Again, masculine and feminine principles, they create differently. And based on what you are, you have different principles that govern your body. So even if you do body modification, if you were born with a penis and now you decided to take that off, you still have to operate with the primary element of the gender of masculine principles to have an easier life in creating. Now, yes, you do contain masculine and feminine principles inside of you, and they need to be in harmony with each other to also create. But if you're a woman, you're going to embody. If you're a man, you're going to go take action. That is why women usually do not feel rejuvenated doing to-do lists, because men are like the sun and women are like the moon. Okay, there's different principles that govern our universe, and you need to understand them in their symbolic language. And that's also where in the scriptures you see the Son of Man comes like east from the west and is like lightning. Okay, that enlightenment comes, it just strikes, and you're like, whoa. Next part is your understanding. And that is where you see if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask for it abundantly. And wisdom is known by its children, because in the spelling, it is a feminine word sometimes. But to the righteous, you see this in Ecclesiastes, he gives wisdom and understanding. Okay, to the righteous, he gives wisdom, understanding, and joy. Because when you have wisdom and understanding, when you've gone within and you sit and you understand these principles, now you have joy in creating. Because you're the master of your house. But Ecclesiastes also says, but to the sinner, okay, miss the mark. In the ancient text, even you also see this with the Gita, it has the word sin in there. It means to miss the mark, okay? When you're out of alignment, which that is your true nature, source, consciousness, life itself, when you're out of alignment and missing the mark, okay, when you're falling short, when you're not upright, righteous, like a pillar, okay, you are going to have vexation, you're going to turmoil, you're going to be upset, and guess what? You're going to be the servant. You're not the master of your house at that point, which means you're not going to be flourishing. You're going to be building somebody else's American dream, not your own, because you have not learned how to use these principles, which means those principles are being used against you. So that's why we want to have wisdom and understanding. And we want to ask Source to give it to us. But we also have to realize there is a cost, cause and effect, okay? Freedom is not free there, and wisdom will cut you. It will hurt. The truth will set you free, but it's going to destroy any illusion that you have. And that is why also, as Proverbs 12:1 says, a fool rebukes correction because they don't have wisdom. Okay, so people that are very much brainwashed with these high control religious systems, they're set in their ways. They're certain, yeah, I got my Willy Wonka ticket to heaven. Everything's good. Leave me alone. Nope, heresy, demon, demonic, Satan. And they demonize everything, which is nothing new. They've been doing that since they came on scene in the 1st through 4th centuries with their orthodox. Okay, but to the wise, he gives wisdom and understanding and then joy. And you depart from hell beneath. Okay, Proverbs says that you can depart from hell. Hell is not eternal. It is a state of consciousness. It is the lower consciousness. It's when you're in turmoil. When you're in turmoil and vexation, you are in hell. Okay, and you are out of alignment and you do not have wisdom and understanding, which means you're not upright. You don't know. The veil is still over your eyes. You're still unconscious, asleep. You're in the kingdom of darkness, unknowing. Different terminologies based on the time and periods and different cultures. But getting back on topic, together, this Trinity, again, the number 3 shows up. 3 is creation. Comes the highest archetype of consciousness. And now number 4, we're going to move on, which is very much your mercy and loving kindness. And if you're wondering why we have 11 circles, you're probably like, wait a second, wouldn't that be number 4? It's because, again, different esoteric traditions have different little paths. And so the tree of Kabbalah, in the flower of life, it does not have the center, the circle here, but in certain Kabbalah lineage traditions of the esoteric, there is the 11th. So I just put the 11th one up on because that is also one of the more, I feel like, common ones when you study esoteric traditions across the board, and that would be knowledge. Okay, that's Dayat, which is number 11, but we're gonna just focus on number 4 right now. And this is your mercy or loving kindness. This is your expansion, your grace, your abundance, and this unconditional giving. What does the Lord require of you? To have mercy. So number 5 is your strength, and that is your discipline, your judgment, your boundaries. That is your necessary limitation. And these operate as balancing polarities of mercy and strength, because polarity is how you also create. Okay, meekness. It's being strong, it's not being weak. Okay, somebody who is meek has mercy and strength. They have a sword, they know how to use it, but they choose to keep it in its sheath. And number 6 is your beauty and glory. This is the harmony of opposites. This is the balance, because it goes down. Remember, we keep going down with this. And that is where we get our compassion. And this is the reconciliation point between mercy and judgment, often associated with the heart center of the higher self. Okay, because these also do correlate then. In certain mystical traditions, they have mapped it to the 7 chakras inside of you. So it does. It just keeps flowing down and they flow into each other. And so when you're out of alignment, this energy, these principles are not flowing properly inside of you. And so our next one is endurance. This is also your victory, sometimes known as eternity, because on the different variations, when you study the different translations, the words slightly sometimes move around. So for example, this one means glory, but also in some traditions, number 8 can also mean glory, but usually I mean that one to mean splendor. Okay, so that one's our splendor, that one's your beauty, but glory is kind of an overlapping word in the English that we use. Okay, but this is your drive, your desire, your emotions, your instinct, your creative passion, and this is the force pushing the experience forward, pushing the manifestation outward, because we get the idea from up above. We get that creative idea from creation itself, and then it just keeps trickling all the way down. We see the beauty in it. We learn how to harness it. We have the glory, and then we push it out with the endurance, which takes us on to Had, which is very much your splendor, or again, it can mean glory. And so this one does mean splendor. This is your language, your logic, your symbolic thought, your communication. You know, you got to communicate your desires of going forth. And so next we have our fountain. And this is the bridge between the spiritual and the material world. Okay, from the invisible to the visible. And that is why you see this symbolism constantly showing up in the scriptures. You see it in Revelation 21:6, I believe. It talks about, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I will give from you that are thirsty, the spring of life, okay? The fountain of living waters. You see it with Psalms. You see it with Proverbs. You know, for in you, in source, okay? When you're in alignment with source, I and the Father are one. You give them the fountain of life. In light, we do see life. For the teaching of the wise is like a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. That's Proverbs 13:4. Because when you are wise, when you have wisdom and understanding, you depart from the hell beneath. Okay, you understand, and therefore you have the source of life. Even Psalms 92, Psalms 96, I don't know, it's up in the 90s. You have it where it says that those that are rooted in the house of the Lord will flourish. Okay, that life will spring forth from them, because life comes from you, not at you. But when you are cutting yourself off from source, you are saying that you have lack, that you have limits, but you are a limitless spiritual being. And when you realize that, you lose your fear of death, because perfect love casts out fear, and source is just endless love. In the Kabbalah tradition, source just wanted to give and give and give, and we wanted to be like God, so we gave back and it broke. Different traditions have their different origin stories, just like, because also in their origin stories, you see that Moses went up to the mountain of Sinai and he got the 22 Hebrew letters. That's how some of the traditions go. But you have the fountain ultimately showing up, because it's the subconscious, it's the imagination, the dreams, the symbolic imagery. You see it in John. Jesus says, whoever comes to me, I will give them to drink from the life and the fountain. They'll never run thirsty or dry, because it's an archetype. You are never meant to worship the symbols. Okay, this storybook character, okay, about a man named Yeshua, it was encoding stuff for you, but you have to realize that this is talking about stuff going on inside of you. Okay, Christ in you, your hope of glory, Colossians, okay? So next we have the kingdom. You are either of the kingdom of darkness or you're the kingdom of light. And as Luke 17:21 says, the kingdom of God is within you. Now, because of bad theology, you can literally tell somebody that and they'll be like, no. That's as in Jesus, okay? Jesus was among them. And it's like, no. Entos means inside of. You tell them, hey, ye are gods. They're like, oh, that's Satan's teaching. It's like, really? Jesus said it, and he was quoting the Psalms, and he speaks to the scriptures. He doesn't speak blasphemy. And they're like, well, that meant judges. And it's like, no, actually in the Greek and the Hebrew, they had different words for judges, and the words used in the original text that we do have is very much divine beings. But this is very much the kingdom, and that is the material realm, that is embodied reality, that is matter, nature, the material plane, the world of action and experience. And so now I want to just talk real quick on the 11th symbol. So in the original Sefer Yetzirah, okay, in the older tradition, there is only the 10 numbers. But in later Kabbalah traditions, they do add the 11th, which is the integrated knowledge. Because with wisdom and understanding, you know. Okay, there is a difference between knowing of truth and intimately knowing truth. Think of giving birth. You can read about it in a book. You can read esoteric books and read about the egoic death and all these things. And you can read about the procedure of giving birth and all the pain the woman goes through and everything else. You can know of birth. But unless you are a woman, and unless you have actually gone through giving birth, you do not intimately know. You have not integrated that knowledge and actually know of, on an intimate union level, what it feels like to give birth. And that is the difference between knowing of truth or thinking you know of truth and actually knowing. When I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, but when I became a man, I put my childish things behind me. And now I see face to face in the clear. The veil has been removed from my eyes, and I know. I have wrestled with God, and now I have seen him face to face, and I shall name this place Peniel. Okay, it has been wrestled with. The invisible has become visible, and with this pineal gland, this fountain of living water, now you have the kingdom. Okay, and now it is going and it's happening because this is very much the integrated understanding in the experimental wisdom. And it actually comes from the Hebrew root word to know, which is the direct, intimate union. And it does have like an invisible bridge. And that is because when you have wisdom and understanding, a father and a mother, you then birth a child. When you have wisdom and understanding, you then birth knowledge. And now I do want to talk about the difference between the 10 numbers and the 22 Hebrew letters because they are different. Because the system is layered. As you've already seen, if you've seen my parodies video, the stories are layered. You're probably noticing the layers of the Trinity. You know, you have your 3 aspects of God's name, and then you have 3 elements, and then you have the major 3 up here, but then you have these 3 down here, and the Trinity just keeps going. And so it's a very layered thing, and that's why esoteric teachings are not just you read a book and you're magically initiated into it. Okay, these are very much in-depth traditions. They very much do take a while to actually understand and to integrate into your system, and then they take even longer to learn, to fuck around and find out with them and applying them. And that's where you want to really make sure that your psyche is truly integrated, and you want to work through your trauma. You want to understand your belief systems going on up here. So the easiest way to understand the difference between the 10 numbers and the 22 letters of creation is the 10 are the what of creation and the 22 letters are the how. This is the what, and then from the letters, from your mouth, okay, from the heart a man speaketh, okay, whatever's going on inside of you, now you speak outward, and that is the how. Does that make sense? Because as you see even in Genesis, and God spoke, okay, because creation occurs, okay, creation, the what occurs through the how with speech and pattern and voice and logos and frequency, and that is why language is very much sacred, and that is why language is very much sacred in these esoteric traditions, because letters are energy, sounds are creative, and words shape your consciousness. As a man thinketh, so is he. Okay, the words you speak become the house you live in. And I talk about that definitely in my book, You Are Art. Yes, I am plugging that in if you guys want to check it out. I very much do talk about the belief systems internally, and we break that down. And we also start to show a deconstruction path for those that might be leaving a fear-based theology. And I do show the comparison of the Gita, the Tao, and the Bible, as well as I start to show the symbolism of these stories. I don't go too deep into them in that book. That's going to be for a different book, but I do start to kind of give the surface level if you want to start wetting your fingers into more esoteric teachings. And so the deeper point with all of these mystic traditions that we talked about today with the Sefer Yetzirah and Kabbalah, and then also if you've seen my Merkava video, is the ancient writers were observing and understanding consciousness. And they were watching how reality creates itself. That's why before God was a man, God was a woman, because they saw the feminine womb as a creative force. Okay, and so then they saw the cosmos as a creative force in which life comes forth, on how consciousness creates. And I think sometimes people, they get really upset, and you even see it like in the early church fathers of the Orthodox Christianity writings. They're pissed at the heretics. They do. They despise them. They demonize them. They're like, oh, you think you're better than us? Oh, those Gnostics. And they get really upset because they don't have the wisdom and understanding to truly know. It just has not clicked in their brains yet. And so therefore they demonize what they don't know. They shut down and they live in certainty. Again, that's why I personally say faith is the opposite of certainty, because with faith, you naturally have questions. And that's what doubt is. Doubt is like, I don't believe that's the full truth. I need to go seek and understand. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask for it. Seeking ye shall find. Knock on the door shall be open. If any of you want, believe ye have received, because by your faith you will be known. By your faith you have been saved. Okay, by the identity you take on. And so when you actually start seeking and you go inward and you start observing these belief systems in your mind, you start taking every thought captive to Christ, you cannot bypass renewing your mind. And people, they do. They want to just try to bypass. They want to take the easy route. They want to be a victim. Well, guess what? If you're a victim of your life, you're not the victor of your life. And if you're a victim of your life, you're giving away the power and authority, the keys that have been given to you, that authority from life itself, Imago Dei, to create a life you love, to other people. You are externalizing it to false gods and deities, and therefore you blame a devil when things go bad and you praise a God when things go good, not realizing that all of that is happening inside of you, and those were archetype characters. So your mental health might not necessarily be your fault, but it is 100% your responsibility. And you can either choose to continue to self-hate and reject yourself and abandon yourself for systems, or you can get to know thyself. Because when you know thyself, if you knew me, you would know the Father. But they neither know me or the Father, and that is why they're not of the kingdom of love. That's why they're not of the kingdom of light. They're unconscious, they're unaware. So you have to learn to integrate, and you have to realize, why do I believe what I believe? And start taking every thought captive to Christ and be transformed by the renewing of your mind to go on to perfection. And that's what they did. They encoded those esoteric teachings into these stories for those that are willing to seek. And as my mentor told me a long time ago, and this is just forever stuck with me, I was like 17 when they told me this, is if you're ever jealous of somebody else's spiritual walk, that is on 100% you. You can be in your Bible more. You can be seeking the divine more. You can be questioning. You can be learning to wanting to understand, and you can go and understand the dark sayings. Or you can choose to bitch and complain of why some people have spiritual gifts and why you haven't developed yours. But you have been given gifts. You have been given gifts, and you have been given desires, and you have been given imagination to use. And so the life that you hate is just a lack of poor imagination on your part. Because if you can believe it and you can see it, you can absolutely achieve it, especially when you apply these cosmic principles, which very much do govern your personal reality. And so these mystics, they very much were attempting to understand how the invisible becomes visible and how thought becomes form. So whether it was through the 22 Hebrew letters or the 3 mother letters or the 4 worlds of Kabbalah or the divine name itself, Yahweh, the traditions repeatedly repeat the same underlining idea that reality unfolds through vibration, sound, polarity, consciousness, relationship, and structure. Because the divine name was never merely about pronunciation, it was about a process. It was very much about the process of creating. It was about being itself, because the I am, the subconscious brain, only creates in the present moment. And so if you're not in the present moment, Psalm says, be still and know that I am God. What is the name of God? I am. Okay, single eye. That is the form. Fountain, okay? The single eye, the pineal gland seen across all cultures. That is how you create. And if you don't meditate and you don't actually start using it, it's a muscle. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. And so most people, they have a lack of imagination. So poor imagination means poor life out here. But those that are awake and aware, those that have eyes to see and ears to hear, they understand these teachings, and they realize that Yahweh is ultimately life itself, source, Keter, flowing through all things, being. And from source comes everything afterwards.